Hey everyone, welcome to Hit the Apex podcast. It's Jawad here as always. Hope everyone's doing well wherever you are in the world. Thank you for tuning in as well this week. Sorry I'm a bit late. Work this week, or was working Monday to Friday this week. Got the weekend off. There's no racing on either this weekend, so makes for a more chill kind of atmosphere and vibe to sit back and talk about the Italian Grand Prix from last weekend. I'm sure a lot of people have mixed feelings and a lot of emotion about it as well. A bit of a sense of deja vu given the ending with the safety car and everything, so I'll go over that all today. Some silly season updates as well. It's kind of stalled, if you'd like to say, with what happened a few weeks ago with Daniel Ricciardo's announcement, and then Oscar Piastri being announced as McLaren's driver for next year. So all the other available seats have kind of stalled in the meantime. So I'll go over that, and also the supercars in New Zealand as well last week, the Auckland SuperSprint talking points, the final supercars event that they had at the Pukekohe Raceway too, so a lot of emotion around that, and we'll get to that a bit later. But first, Monza, not really the most entertaining or exciting race we've had this season. Not the most exciting race of Monza we've had, in fact, as well. It kind of ended this year on a bit of a whimper behind the safety car. It didn't really stop Max Verstappen taking his fifth consecutive win this season and an 11th of the year as well in total. He's just unstoppable at the moment. As many grid penalties as you want to throw at him, it's going to make no difference. He did take a grid penalty actually this weekend and started down in 7th, shot up to the top 3 on the first lap as well, I think, or he was in the top 4. And then by the second lap, he was already into 3rd. So, that Red Bull. And I don't think I've said much this season. You can correct me if I'm wrong, but I haven't given much praise to Red Bull in their car. It seems they've got, a car that's quite similar to how it was performing back in their dominant days in the early 2010s. With Sebastian Vettel and Mark Webber. Sure, the teammate in Sergio Perez is not really getting much out of it at the moment, but the fact that Max is just on such an incredible run, and just how reliable and how strong it is in a straight line too. I mean, straight line speed has never been a characteristic of a Red Bull before from the power units, so hats off to them for what they're doing at the moment with that car, because it's just unstoppable in every sense of it. So yeah, good on Max there. You had Charles Leclerc take pole position, and this is without all the penalties buggering the grid either. So he was on pole on pure pace. He led George Russell in the early stages of the race. Russell starting from the front row because of grid penalties, of course. Carlos Sainz was meant to be up there, as was Verstappen and Sergio Perez as well, but it put the Mercedes up there. Had a virtual safety car early in the race on lap 13 that was triggered by Sebastian Vettel, so not a great day for Aston Martin. Both cars actually didn't reach the end of the race, unfortunately. Bit of a miserable one for them, you can say. But that virtual safety car quite early triggered Ferrari to bring Charles Leclerc in for the medium tyre. So basically, it was going to be a one-stop race without, interruptions and whatnot. And, you could go into like lap 20, 25 or 28, or between laps 25 and 28 on the soft tyre, and then do the rest of the race on the mediums. I don't think the hard would have been worth using, but a few drivers did go onto the hard compound tyre. Leclerc starting on the softs, same as Verstappen, but having come in early. Now, with that too, they reacted to the virtual safety car. Personally, I don't think it was worth it, given the fact that the virtual safety car finished just as Leclerc was coming out of the pit, so whatever advantage he thought he would have gained didn't really yield anything for him in the end. So again, Ferrari kind of, taking a risk with their strategy, and it just not actually paying anything out to them. So that was a bit sad while you saw Max continue on. And, they credit to them for the way they looked after their tyres, because they did quite a bit of overtaking early in the race, and then also be able to go as far as lap 26 to pit from those soft tyres over to the mediums. And, then he was about 10 seconds behind Leclerc in the end, and it just was a bit of a seesaw in terms of strategy between those top three, top four drivers. Realistically, the top two were in contention for the win. Leclerc back in on lap 34 for the soft tyres, because having come in so early for the mediums, he wasn't going to get to the end of the race on that, and maybe Ferrari thought by being a bit aggressive and being on that soft tyre at the end might give them the pace, but it was pretty dismal. I think at one point, and even Ted Kravitz in the Sky coverage pointed out that good news for Tifosi fans, he's closing in on Verstappen, but at the rate of 1/10 of a second per lap. So that's got to be really disheartening when you hear that back. And given how strong the Red Bull is, they could have had a hard tyre on, a worn hard tyre, and still been quicker than Leclerc on fresh softs. So it just, it's so disheartening when you look at it that way. You had on one side of the field, you had one stoppers going long on the medium tyre and then switching over to the softs at the end. This is prior to the safety car that we had at the end of the race. Medium tyre starters being the likes of Carlos Sainz, Lewis Hamilton, who actually did start towards the back of the grid with those grid penalties, Lando Norris as well, who had a pretty shocking start but was able to solidify a position in the points for him. Basically what I'm trying to say is the soft tyre was the important tyre to be on at the end. So that was that between those front runners. Checo, like I said before, he did make his way up the field and got the fastest lap too. So Leclerc, being on a fresh set of soft tyres, still couldn't get fastest lap, while you had Perez get that feat down in 6th position. The race turned on its head, not really, at the end there. Lap 47, Daniel Ricciardo comes to a halt between the Lesmo corners, and he was having a great race too. I mean, by the end of the first lap, he was third, because his teammate got a bad start, and Ricciardo started 4th on the second row. He was up to third, and was in the top 10 for quite a lot of the race, and that was encouraging to see, given the fact that he's not really had any races even at tracks which we've seen him do well in past seasons. He's not really shown much competitiveness, but he was a bit more competitive this time round, and sadly, what could have been a points finish got taken away from him because there was some reliability problems there. So Ricciardo's out, safety car out on lap 48. Remember, it's a 53 lap race. You had George Russell come in, Sainz come in to switch over to softs for the end, but given how close we were to the end of the race, it was looking very likely that we would finish the race under safety car. And this is where a lot of wounds got reopened, the deja vu, the criticism, and the just everyone comes out of the woodworm to offer their opinion on this. Abu Dhabi 2021. So we know what happened there. Don't have to repeat all that and whatnot. But what Monza showed us is that even though the FIA followed the rules, the race control, they followed the rules, and they were going to restart the race. If there was laps available, they would have restarted the race by letting all the lapped cars unlap themselves, all the lapped cars, that is, and then after that is done is when the safety car comes in on the following lap, not on the same lap as we saw in Abu Dhabi. So even though they followed the rules, we still have a situation where people feel aggrieved and upset that, oh, they could have red flagged the race like they did in Baku and made it a lot more entertaining. Which, to be fair, yeah, it would have been great to have a grandstand finish. That was Michael Massey's principle when it came to restarting the Abu Dhabi race last year. But, what differs in all those examples, Baku in particular, there was a lot of debris that needed to be cleared off the front straight, being so quick as it is. The only way they could have done that safely was under a red flag. But there is potential there for being able to use that in the future. Like, it would have to become a rule. That's the thing, is at the moment, the rules don't say anything about getting to a certain percentage in the race, and if a safety car comes out, red flag it so we can have a restart or whatever. We're just following what the rules say. That's what everyone wanted after Abu Dhabi last year. Everyone's like, they didn't follow the rules, this is ridiculous, F1 is fixed, yada yada, hashtag F1 fixed. Friggin' hate that hashtag. I think I've blocked it and every other iteration of it I can find on Twitter because it always rears its dirty old head. But basically, they follow the rules on this in this instance. Red flagging it, unless it's needed, would seem artificial too. So there's basically no winners in this. And, there's been races in the past where races and even championships, if you want to say, finished behind safety cars. So 2012 is an example where the Brazilian Grand Prix, the race finished behind the race finished under safety car, and that was the end of the season too. So, the championship was decided, or not decided, but it finished under that safety car. So I don't see that it's anything worth getting so riled up about. Of course it ended on a whimper and it was a damp squib. If the gap was closed and we had like a one-lap shootout at the end, could Charles Leclerc have won? Potentially. Could George Russell or Carlos Sainz have won? Potentially. But in the end, Max had the faster car. He was doing the better job. I'm sure he would have held on anyway to win. But it's just hard not to get into this debate again, open up those old wounds and say, this should have been done previously and all that jazz. Still with the whole Massey thing, it's like his thinking, perhaps, or his rationale behind how Abu Dhabi unfolded was to avoid a situation like we got in Monza. But then again, people are unhappy with what happened in Monza. They're unhappy with what happened in Abu Dhabi. People were just not going to be happy, full stop. I mean, society becomes so miserable that we can't actually celebrate anything anymore. I'm being sarcastic and got a lot of tongues firmly in cheek at the moment. The tongue is firmly in cheek at the moment. So, yeah, I do that quite a bit. I get a bit cheeky, be a bit of a smart ass. But look, at the end of the day, no one is happy. I quite agree with what I've heard other people, like, on the race as well, saying that, like, if you want to set a precedent or something like this, just change the rules or make a specific rule where you get to 75% or 80% race distance, and if a safety car comes out or an incident occurs, just red flag it regardless, or even do what they do in Formula E, for example, and add an extra 2 laps on at the end or something. But that opens up its own little debate about fuel and all that sort of stuff as well. Do you have to overfuel the car? Some people are going to underfuel to get an advantage. And also, how often does this happen as well? It's not often where we have a situation where you get a safety car right at the end of the race and they have to finish behind it. So, let's just close this chapter and move on. I think, it wasn't going to change the outcome. I think, in my opinion, that is, Max has been an absolute demon, this season, the last 5 races, even in Zandvoort. It escaped me almost for a second. Even in Zandvoort, with the safety car at the end and the restart, he was able to get past the Mercedes. There was no chance for Mercedes there. Was there a safety car in Zandvoort? I don't know. Yes, there was for Valtteri Bottas. Sorry, just had a blank there. It feels like such a long time ago when it was only 2 weeks. Anyway, so, that's just how good Max has been this season. Chapter closed. Let's move on. Have a nice day. And no, that's not the end of the podcast, so let's keep going. Making up your podium at the end of the day, Verstappen, Leclerc, Russell, great race from Russell, and even for Leclerc too. I mean, even though he was on pole, there was potential for him to win, if they had made the right strategic calls and possibly with a safety car at the end. They've just got to take solace in the fact that, they're just not as quick as the Red Bull at the moment. So second is okay, I guess. Great drives also from Sainz and Hamilton from the back of the field, finishing 4th and 5th. We had that epic pass from Hamilton on Pierre Gasly and Lando Norris as well, who came in behind Perez in 6th. Lando surviving that poor start, you got to say. And a poor pit stop too. I think he could have easily finished in the top 6. But then, he did pit under the safety car and lost that position to Checo too. So he would have easily been 6th if they didn't do that. Sergio himself surviving a bit of a brake fire as well. And then Hamilton also not pitting under the safety car. So those guys not doing that and ended up 5th and 6th ahead of Norris and Gasly, who had some solid races. And we haven't seen Gasly have a race like this in quite a while too. So good on him to make the one-stop work and come home in 8th position. No points for Alpine on the day. Fernando Alonso having a DNF, power unit related issue, I think it was, with the deployment or whatever. And Esteban Ocon in 14th. Oh, sorry, not 14th. He was in 11th. I don't know where I got 14th from. Maybe that's where he started the race because he did have a grid penalty as well. But they still have that 18-point gap over McLaren in the Constructors' Championship. It was kind of helped by the fact that Ricciardo didn't finish either and was classified to score some points. But at the end of the day, Danny can't be really faulted for his efforts this time out. So, great drive, hope, and just, would have been nice if he was able to finish and score some points in that. Behind Gasly, we had an amazing debut for Nick De Vries, the Formula E champion from last season, subbing in for Alex Albon. And thoughts at the moment with Alex Albon, hopefully he is home and resting now after that appendix surgery. Apparently there was complications from the anaesthetic or whatever afterwards that had put him into ICU. So I hope he is back home and resting now. No, not sure if he'll be ready in time for the Singapore Grand Prix in a couple of weeks. But yeah, that's a bit scary. I'm sure people who've got anxiety about surgeries and hospitals and whatnot have that fear of anaesthetic, going under and not waking back up and whatnot. And that's why they tell you not to eat anything before a surgery or to not have, be on clear fluids depending on what kind of procedure it is. Not that I'm a medical expert. I have spent quite a bit of time in hospitals over the last 2 months, so I am qualified in that respect to give my 2 cents on that. But that's why they say to fast before going under general anaesthetic, because you can end up choking on something while you're under, and that's not good. Anyway, hope Albon's okay and he's back in time for the Singapore Grand Prix. But De Vries, oh my God, how long has it taken him to make his race debut in F1? He's a quick driver. Everyone who's known him from Formula E will know how great he is, and from his F2 days too. He was F2 champion, let's not forget, back in 2020, I'm going to say it was. But he put on a sensational display. He was 9th on the grid, 8th on the grid because of the grid penalties. He was eliminated not eliminated, he was elevated up from where he did actually qualify, which was in Q2. He made it through to Q2 and then finished the race in ninth to score 2 points on debut, becoming the 65th driver to do that in F1 history, and really just making a case for himself to be on the Formula One grid next year, whether it's with Williams or elsewhere, which I'll get to a bit shortly when we're talking about the silly season and whatnot. But yeah, it was a great job from him. And Zhou Guanyu as well, back in the points, scoring a single point for Alfa Romeo. Good result for him, and what is kind of Alfa Romeo's home race, even though the Sauber team is Swiss. They had something to at least celebrate there with Valtteri Bottas having finished down in 13th. Otherwise, it's 116 points now between Verstappen and Leclerc in the championship. Mathematically, Max has a chance of winning the championship in Singapore next time out. Is that going to happen? You never know. Stranger things have happened. I think he's got to rely on Leclerc to finish no higher than 8th, and Perez to finish no higher than 6th or 7th or something like that, and for Max to win the race as well. But yeah, we'll just have to wait and see that one. But also, given the fact that we've still got a handful of races to go, that's his 11th win of the season. He could reach Sebastian Vettel's record of 13 wins in a season, which is the most wins of any driver in a single season of F1, and that was set back in 2013. So given the fact, and putting it into perspective, given the fact that Lewis Hamilton and Mercedes have dominated the sport, in recent times since 2017, as great as Hamilton's dominance has been, he's never put together that many wins in a single season. So for Max to get that and for that record to stay within Red Bull as well will be quite special for those guys. But yeah, there's can't say any more really than has already been said by everybody about Max's performances this season and whatnot. So we'll leave it at that. Look forward to Singapore in a few weeks' time. It would be nice to be back at the Singapore Grand Prix too, because it's obviously not been on the calendar for a couple of seasons due to obvious pandemic-related reasons. And we'll move it on then. Talk about some silly season stuff, some junior champions as well. So both the F2 and F3 titles were wrapped up over the weekend. Felipe Drugovich winning the F2 title, Victor Martins winning in F3. And pretty much after that, we got the announcement of Drugovich being signed on by Aston Martin as a development drive. So the Fernando Alonso succession plan has already been initiated there at Aston Martin, even though Alonso hasn't even made the switch to the team yet. But, just getting a young driver ready. I don't watch a whole lot of the junior categories, which is why I don't talk about them too much. I'm not going to go into depth about, what's happening in the races and all that. It's just, time is limited. I have access to them, but I'm busy doing other stuff. I'll catch up on the news and everything, but I'm not going to try and sound like I know everything about it. But good on these guys for winning. Drugovich is exciting because we haven't had a Brazilian driver in F1 for a while. I think it was Felipe Massa, obviously, back in 2018, the last time we had, or 2017, when Bottas went over to Mercedes and Massa got called out of retirement to race for Williams again. That was the last time we had a Brazilian driver on the grid. So yeah, the importance of a Brazilian driver is quite important. Same thing with German. We've always had a German driver on the grid for quite some time, and next year there's a potential of not a German driver being on the grid. That would be quite scary if Mick Schumacher does fall off the grid. And that initiates the silly season stuff that I'm going to talk about. So obviously a stall in the market now. Alpine still haven't filled that vacancy after Fernando Alonso and Oscar Piastri basically said, not good enough for us, bye. So in recent weeks, there's been a lot of talk about Colton Herta from IndyCar coming in to AlphaTauri if Pierre Gasly is to go off and join his good mate Esteban Ocon at Alpine. Yes, good mate. No, not really. But that seems to have kind of not come to fruition at all. I think overnight there was some news about that saying that Red Bull have pretty much given up trying to get Herta in, and also like it's a shame given the fact that IndyCar is such a top category in open wheel racing in the world that being a race winner and a 7-time race winner in Herta's instance doesn't qualify you enough for super license points to go in F1. Yet we've had all sorts of drivers driving in F1 who are half as good or a quarter as good as someone like Herta, who's still a bit of a hooligan. But that's besides the point. When you got the likes of Mazepin and Latifi and stuff being able to race, even Sergei Sirotkin back in the day, they had to make concessions for him to get a super license, which was ridiculous. That they can't get someone like Herta in is absolutely outrageous. So hopefully they look into that into the future, particularly with IndyCar and how prestigious it is. They should make it a bit easier for drivers from there to come across over to F1, because it seems to be one-way traffic at the moment with drivers going from F1 over to IndyCar. And while we're on the topic of IndyCar, congratulations of course to Will Power on title number 2, taking that championship win over there at Laguna Seca over the weekend as well. Alex Palou winning the race and confirming that he will be staying at Chip Ganassi Racing next year, and so he's no longer going to be going to McLaren, and I'm sure a sigh of relief for Felix Rosenqvist as well, who could have been ending up back at McLaren's Formula E project. But he'll be in the IndyCar team with Pato Ward and Alexander Rossi, who comes across from the Andretti camp. And got to say to Scott McLaughlin, well done. To finish, I think, 4th in the championship this year, had 3 wins as well. He's going to be in it next year, contender for sure. Penske have had a good year. Joseph Newgarden did finish 2nd in the championship, so would love to see Scotty up there again next year and possibly even bring it home. But for Will Power, it's delightful as an Aussie to say, the boy from Toowoomba getting another IndyCar win. Going back to the silly season though, so with Herta seemingly out of the hunt, what else are the options? Alpine still going to go after Gasly? Do they think about Jack Doohan, son of Mick Doohan, of course, the MotoGP legend. Do they think about him? Personally, I think it's still a bit too early for Jack. I think he needs another year in F2 and possibly win the title if he can before he's considered. Who else do Alpine consider if they don't get Gasly? But if they do get Gasly, who do AlphaTauri consider? Because there's not really much stock in the Red Bull camp at the moment in the junior tiers in terms of drivers who would be worthy of replacing Gasly. Like, you've got Liam Lawson, you've got some others, Daruvula I think as well, but they're not really drivers that get me excited. I don't know, that's the thing, I don't watch enough of the junior series to be able to see the intricacies of what they do and everything. Did read something about Nick De Vries potentially having met with Helmut Marko as well recently. Are they going to get him on the books? Which would be a big signing, which would be a big coup for Red Bull if they did, and not that, not that De Vries is like in the same age bracket as a lot of the other Red Bull juniors at the moment. A bit of a shock actually to me that De Vries is actually a year younger than me, given he looks like a baby. And that's not only, I didn't say that, it was my partner who's like, oh my god, he looks like such a baby. I'm like, yeah, he's 27. He's a year younger than me. That's ridiculous. But yeah, for De Vries, if he can land that, that's great. He's in the Red Bull system. He's already proved with his debut for Williams that he is definitely ready for F1. He's got a lot of maturity and experience elsewhere. And does that potentially put him in frame for a Red Bull drive in the future too? If Perez ends up leaving or retiring, that would be such a great way into F1 for a driver who at one point it didn't look like he was going to get in, given the fact that he was on McLaren's books for so long, ended up disassociating with them, went over to Formula E, ended up in Mercedes's camp, being their reserve driver and test driver in F1, but also driving for them in FE. And the next year he'd be combining a Maserati FE program with a Toyota WEC program as well, but he'd have to give that up if he's on the F1 grid. So, I'm sure De Vries' signature will be wanted by not only Williams, but potentially AlphaTauri in this instance too. So that would be great to see. Could we also see Nico Hülkenberg potentially make another comeback for Hülkenberg? Initially, there was talks that he could be going over to Haas. I think that's the only team he's been linked with so far. But possibly go over to Haas and replace Mick Schumacher. So at least there will be a German driver on the grid if that happens. The other candidate was Giovinazzi, but I don't know if Formula One is ready for another stint from Giovinazzi, because he didn't really impress in his last one. So I'd rather much take Hülkenberg over Giovinazzi. But even for Williams, going back to them, someone like Logan Sargent, who's their reserve and junior driver, wouldn't it be a snub if they didn't pick him, for example? Or is he not ready yet? Where does Daniel Ricciardo fit into this as well? Is he going to have to stare down the barrel of a year out of F1 if it means he gets a reserve driver gig at Mercedes or whatever, and potentially hope that Lewis Hamilton retires the year after or next year so he can be in the seat the year after? Who knows? There's a lot still to play out, so it's quite interesting. But there's quite a bit of a stall at the moment after all the excitement that we had in earlier weeks. So we'll see if anything happens in the next few weeks ahead of the Singapore race, and then once the flyways start again. So So for supercars in the Auckland SuperSprint, it was the last event at Pukekohe Raceway. Very emotional weekend, and who other than Shane Van Gisbergen winning the Jason Richards Trophy as well. Of course, the Jason Richards Trophy being awarded to the winner who has the most points at the end of the weekend. Just across the round, that is. Picking up 2 race wins, of course, as well, and equaling the record set by Scott McLaughlin back in 2019 for most race wins in a single season. As well, congratulations to Gizzy. Again, like Max Verstappen, there's no faulting Van Gisbergen this year. He's just been in a league of his own. If you thought last year was a strong year for Van Gisbergen, this year has been just totally next level, and with the added emotion as well of Pukekohe being farewelled and everything, I think it was poetic that we saw Shane win that. We saw him come into Saturday lacking pace. He wasn't fast in qualifying, wasn't fast in the race. He had to settle behind the leaders. Will Davison driving another great race from pole position to win that one, not from pole position, from second. He shared the front row with Cameron Waters, but Van Gisbergen starting in 7th and finishing 5th, but then won from pole in race 28, and then from 8th he came up to win in race 29. Basically doing what Verstappen did at Monza is how you can compare the two this season. So Davison obviously romping to the win in race 27, but a race 29, an unsafe release in the pits, pretty much ruined his run. He was in contention for the JR trophy, but he got the drive-through penalty and a second pit stop he had to do as well, so that pretty much put him out of the running and was down in like 22nd or something, a lap off as well, so that ruined his run. You had Andre Heimgartner as well, of course, driving in that famous number 8 for Brad Jones Racing, the number 8 with the BOC livery back in the day, being driven by Jason Richards himself. And then, of course, Heimgartner, to me, looked like he was going to emulate what Jason Bright did back in 2013 to take out the inaugural Jason Richards trophies. There was couple of great pit stops from the Brad Jones Racing crew that bolstered Heimgartner into contention. He wasn't able to finish, closely, or wasn't really in the hunt with Will Davison in the first race, but he did put himself into contention in the third race of the weekend, only to come home in third. But getting a pair of podiums is still quite special for him. First time he's been on the podium on home soil, and getting some like 2.5 second stops. That's like Formula One level pit stops in supercars, where it's a lot slower, you've got to say. So great job from those guys. But yeah, you got to say race 29, the highlight was that epic battle between Van Gisbergen and Waters towards the end. Sadly, some unforced errors by Cam Waters cost him, and there was that moment where they were coming out of the final corner, and if Van Gisbergen just didn't lift at all, he could have put Waters into the wall, along the outside of the main straight, and that would have been pretty nasty for him, considering we already had some nasty incidents earlier on in the day, as race 28 was marred by a red flag. Anton De Pasquale, poor Anton, gets a poor start and gets hit by Brody Kostecki, and the car ricocheting and ending up in the middle of the track with quite a bit of damage, but he was able to race on in race 29 and finish 5th. But then, the incident at turn 10 between Will Brown and Mark Winterbottom. Of course, Winterbottom signing a new deal, multi-year deal to stay there at Team 18, which is good. We'll see him on the grid for a bit longer. The 2015 champion. There was a big incident between them there that put Brown into the wall at pit entry with a 56G impact. So that was a big one. Apparently the biff between those two started earlier on. But then, Frosty apparently carried on and then just finished Brown off at turn 10 and put him in the wall, which he was punished with a drive-through penalty, but it might have been, Frosty was saying it wasn't intentional, and given how Frosty's got a pretty decent record when it comes to that sort of thing, you can't really say much more than that, but that wasn't what he got in terms of a reception from the Erebus team when he went into their garage post-race. He was trying to apologise to Brown, but, they didn't really want him in the garage, and then you had big bad Barry Ryan come in trying to pretend he's, probably watching the South Sydney and Sydney Roosters game over the weekend, and trying to shirt front Winterbottom, which I'm sure he's been reported for as well, getting a bit physical there. A team manager and a driver, or a team manager getting physical with a driver, that's not a good look at all. And yeah, not great in the end, but that's just the way the cookie crumbles, unfortunately. And at least Winterbottom did try to apologise and make his point clear. He was punished for it anyway with the drive-through penalty, but Erebus just felt like, that wasn't going to fly, and, they wanted to carry on the way they did. It looks bad on them rather than Frosty, so we'll leave that be. And unfortunately, there was fear that they might need to use that spare chassis that they had that was intended for the wildcard entry, Greg Murphy and Richie Stanaway, for Brown ahead for the Bathurst 1000 next up. But I think they're going to finally get that chassis fixed and let the wildcard entry run, because that'll be exciting, seeing Murphy and Stanaway tackle the mountain together. So yeah, well then that pretty much sums up this episode, or rounds up this episode of the podcast. Thank you very much for tuning in. As always, feel free to follow me on Twitter at @HitTheApexMedia. There's also a Linktree to all the other social accounts that I'm on, from my live blogs on the Raw to Instagram for some pretty pictures and whatnot. So yeah, feel free to do that. Until then, there's a nice break between now and the Singapore Grand Prix, and you won't hear me until post Singapore Grand Prix for the review, and I'm sure we'll be talking a bit about Bathurst as well, with the Bathurst 1000 coming up as well. So yeah, thank you very much for tuning in, and I'll see you guys next time.